As Nick said, I was living in a flat behind Waterloo. Money wasn't the particular issue. It was a particularly inexpensive flat. It probably cost about £4,500 a week now. It wasn't there. But the bottom line is I came to renew, and there was some erroneous information on my credit file. Nothing to do with me at all. It had been investigated 3 years prior. It had been removed by the credit agency 3 years prior, but it came up again. So I asked Experian and I asked Equifax, and said, look, you've investigated this, you know this isn't me, can you take it off? And they said, no. And the reason we're not going to do that is because we're not responsible for the information that we hold about you. So we don't need to check the accuracy, we don't need to make sure that the person is you, we can just take what a debt collection agent says and apportion it to your file, which I think is insane. But that's what happened, so it meant that I couldn't renew my tenancy because my credit file showed me as a bad credit risk. Now I thought there must be an organisation out there somewhere that I can address this with, and apparently it's the Information Commissioner's Office. So I got in touch with the ICO and said, look, this is the problem, I've got 6 weeks to get this sorted out before my renewal comes out. And they said, well, we'll deal with it in 28 days. So I was like, okay, 28 days, they're going to sort it out, I'm going to be fine. Took them a year and a half, 18 months, before they actually got back to the credit agencies, and they can only request, they can't even enforce, that they removed that information from my file, and having done so, obviously my file was pristine again, but by this time, the damage has been done. As Nick said, I suffer with chronic fatigue syndrome. The stress of all this resulted in me in a hospital stay. I was in hospital for 3 months, bedbound, and when I was discharged to a homeless hostel. And this is where the whole process collapsed on itself entirely. So I'm now homeless, bedridden, needing care, not being provided. I'm supposed to be getting housing benefits and disability benefits, both of which are not being provided. I'm in a council-run hostel, and in that environment they decided to threaten me with eviction because they weren't getting housing benefit from their other departments. I had no control over this whatsoever. And it wasn't until the intervention of Private Eye magazine and Chuck Umana that we actually got them to admit they owed me £3,500 for DWP and eventually pay up. And eventually I was able to pay some, not all, of what was owed on the rent, because I didn't get all the money through. So regardless of the press, regardless of the profile, regardless of the situation that I was wheelchair bound and in a homeless hostel, they decided to evict me to the streets in my wheelchair. Had I not had friends, I would have died in that spot with a single person caring in that. Not a one. Fortuitously, some friends helped me out. I started to rebuild. During that time, I didn't stop working. I'm a filmmaker, I'm a producer, I carried on doing stuff from my hospital bed, I carried on doing stuff from my hostel bed, and I carried on doing stuff when I started living in my car, as I continued to do to date. The problem now was, because my credit file had got screwed, everything else had got screwed, I now genuinely had a bad credit rating. So now I can't do anything, because the whole system is about estate agents, and is about getting clearance, and about references, and about a whole bundle of things. So then I made the decision that it's easier to reside in my car and continue my life than it is trying to go through a variety of things. I get ill again. And now we come into no second night out, because now I'm starting to suffer, I'm feeling that I need support. I end up living at Heathrow Airport, which has one of the best social care teams in the country, which is a privately run one, by the way, so charity's got nothing to do with the state. It's called Travel Care, and they were fantastic. They helped me stay in the airport for a while. But eventually they put me in touch with No Second Night Out. And No Second Night Out is a great idea that has nowhere to go. So No Second Night Out's purpose is to get a person from the streets to somewhere else. And where that somewhere else is, doesn't really matter. Whether it's back to a council, back to another organisation, and you go from pillar to post, from pillar to post, from pillar to post. And actually the problem never gets solved. All the way down that route, I was offered various initiatives. One of them was being able to rent privately if I signed up with an organisation based in Lambeth called Lettings First. That turned out to be a complete scam, because when you sign up with them, you immediately say you don't want to go on a council waiting list. That organisation was part-funded, privately run, had a contract that ended a month later, didn't deliver, and then I couldn't get back onto the council on its waiting list. So then you find yourself in this murky mire of not being able to get the benefits to do what they're legally responsible to do, not being able to get the local authorities to do what they're legally responsible to do. and suddenly not having any money, completely destitute, and then reliant on the very charities and third sector organisations who are supposed to be bailing you out of these situations, who are now creating more and more problems. I could have resolved my problem literally overnight if I was allowed to use my housing benefit for a hotel room, a hostel room, a canal boat, a camper van, rental of a car. I could have done anything to have allowed myself to get off the streets. But the system says no. The system says you have to have this type of accommodation in this way, with this particular evidence, in this particular order, in these particular times. My favourite was Westminster Council. I presented myself to Westminster Council as a homeless person, and they said, prove it. I was like, oh, all right. Not entirely sure how you prove a negative, but what do you need? And they said, well, we need evidence that you're homeless. And I was like, great, what is it that you need? And eventually we came up between us with the idea that if you check my credit file, you will find I have no bank account, no credit cards, no address history, no electoral register history. I'm living in my car, so I have to have car insurance. But it's a criminal offence to have car insurance without an address. So I've remained my old address on my car insurance. Westminster Council go, well, this proves you've got a house. And I'm like, well, no, that's just my car insurance. Have you got anything in the electoral register? No. Have you got anything with any of my credit? No. Didn't make a single difference. They were just like, no, you've got car insurance at this address. All right, yes, admittedly it was 5 years ago, but nonetheless, it's still current today. We're not going to accept that you're homeless. And I'd like to ask anybody how you prove the absence of something. I think that's literally impossible to do. So, eventually, as I say, I just lived in my car, and I park in central London. For a long time it was my car, and then I had that removed by the police mistakenly, and the catalogue of errors go on again. So now I borrow a car. Friend's very generous and gracious, lets me loan his car. And that's where I sleep, and I bloot in the mornings in my local gym, and I work in a local cafe, and I just kind of maintain and sustain my life best as I can. I get assistance, or should get assistance, from the DWP with DLA and IB, or as they were, but I'm still currently on them. But unfortunately, once again, we find that as soon as you don't have an address, they cease. They go, we need a postal address. And you're like, well, I'm homeless, and by the way, you said you were going to do everything electronically 5 years ago. In fact, 17 years ago, you came up with the Electronic Communications Act. But now they're going, no, you must have a postal address, because it's safer to put a piece of paper in another piece of paper with a bit of spittle and throw it through 100 hands and shove it through a hole in the door than it is to have an encrypted message that has never been decrypted sent across the internet that goes directly into your inbox. And this is what the government won't have anymore. But anyway, that's my story. I hope that's helped in some way. And I'll continue going on as best I can, and will support everything you do, Nick, and everybody here. Thank you, Bob.